Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. Today, we are discussing consciousness, physics, artificial intelligence, and Bernie Sanders with Dr. Aaron Adair.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
Believe it or not, sitting on our shoulders is the most complex object that Mother Nature has created in the known universe. Well, one way to look at it is through evolution. That is, the back of the brain is the so-called reptilian brain, the most ancient, primitive part of the brain that governs balance, territoriality, mating. Then we have the center part of the brain going forward, and that's the so-called monkey brain, the mammalian brain, the brain of emotions, the brain of social hierarchies. Then finally, the front of the brain is the human brain, especially the prefrontal cortex. This is where rational thinking is. And when you ask yourself a question, where am I anyway? The answer is right behind your forehead. That's where you really are. Consciousness is the number of feedback loops required to create a model of your position in space with relationship to other organisms and finally in relationship to time.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Dr. Aaron Adair is an engineer. You've been a professor a few times, haven't you? I know you taught physics. Did you ever do any philosophy?
Technically, no, but closest maybe coming from just related to my own studies when it comes to interactions of science and religion. That's probably the closest I can say to being any philosopher of sorts.
I saw you had this book, The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptic View. That's kind of a cool title.
I'm glad someone liked the title. I keep coming back to it and thinking like, why did I do that? But topic-wise, the story is going back to the Christmas story and the fact that for about 200 years, there have been various attempts to explain the story of Christmas and the star that was supposed to be at Jesus' birth, totally in terms of astronomy or maybe astrology. And I go through and point out like some of the history of this idea, why it doesn't work, and why it's almost certainly fiction.
Yeah, it's crazy how we think of those things as almost like, well, that happened. You know, like we'll say, okay, yeah, maybe there's no God, or maybe there's no real Jesus, or, you know, but we don't really think about like all the details. We just kind of go, oh yeah, that was, I noticed in my, what was it? It was my history of religions class. In the textbook itself, it has Moses's exodus from Egypt on a timeline with other things that like literally happen. And they're not even asking if that's real or not. Obviously, like I can see that you could just do like a place setter somewhere to say this is when he claims it happened, but they didn't even do that. They just said this is when Exodus happened. There's no evidence for Jews in Egypt. What are you talking about?
Heck, I actually remember back in I think 7th grade social studies textbook, and it even has this map of the route Abraham took going from basically Kuwait to modern day Israel. And of course, this is, maybe in the 90s, and we've known for at least by that point, 20 years, hey, this story couldn't have happened. It's talking about him riding around camels, which haven't been domesticated for 1,000 years after the alleged time of Abraham.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, it was one of the details that, was published back in the 70s by Thomas Thompson, something that actually got him in trouble, that had to stay out of academia for a while. Literally was a painter for houses for a while until they said, hey, we believe you now. Fascinating.
You ever hear the idea that Moses's burning bush experience was actually some kind of psychedelic plant similar to an ayahuasca?
Not that particular one, but I've definitely heard of others, trying to explain various bits of religion or religious history by means of drugs. I mean, there was even the alleged idea that Jesus was basically a code word for magic mushroom, but...
Yeah, that one's weird.
That only gets you so far, though.
Yeah, it's similar to the Jesus was just a conspiracy by the Roman government. Neat, but You can't stay there for very long before you quickly realize there's just no evidence for that.
Well, I mean, come on, you believe there are Romans? Conspiracy is much deeper.
Right.
And I'm not making that up. There is that conspiracy theory that literally like everything that we call like antiquity and the Dark Ages was literally invented by like the Byzantines and like
Yeah.
100 or something.
I had a guy on that didn't believe history was real. And like any history, he believes that there was some big mud flood right around, I want to say like early 1900s or something. And we have no idea what happened before that, but everything they're telling us is a lie. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
All right, that one drugs might explain in part. I don't know.
Yeah, I would hope so. I at least hope you're having fun. Dr. Adair, what is consciousness? What is the mind?
Oh boy,
that's an easy one.
Yeah, just real easy stuff. Sometimes I even wonder if we've gotten so confused on what consciousness is that we don't actually have a definition that ultimately really works, that captures what it's supposed to be. And that's why we keep banging our heads against the wall. But at very base level is some awareness of your own experiences, some awareness of basically what's poking you. Yeah.
Is it fair to say an ant is conscious? Or you know what I mean? Like something at low level.
I mean, if you think of consciousness as a binary, as like have it, don't have it, then yeah, it's really hard to say. But if you say like there's levels of consciousness, if it's some sort of spectrum, then yeah, ants have like some level of awareness of their stimulus and react to it. And perhaps with a little bit more advancement than say a bacteria does, like just noticing where sugar is. But it's definitely not as high as say a rabbit, which isn't as high as a chimp, which is definitely not as high as a human.
Yeah, I feel like anytime I speak to someone that is from a religious background, more or less, they are very comfortable with the on-off switch of consciousness. It either is or it isn't. And it's weird where they draw the line, because it would make sense if you draw the line at Homo sapien and everything else, because then I could see how that might work with some kind of religious concept of an afterlife and so on and so forth. But I had a gentleman on to talk about idealism, kind of similar to panpsychism. That was his take. And it's very unsatisfying to me to just think of it as, like you said, binary. Because obviously my dog is fairly self-aware. If you put a sticker on a chimpanzee or something like that, and they look in a mirror, they say, hey, what's that sticker doing on my forehead? And they pull it off. There's levels to this. And I even, I always think of like plants. If you constantly vibrate the ground in one direction, their roots end up moving that way because they're heading toward rain patter, right? The vibration of the raindrops hitting the ground. And I think like that's not like it intends to do that, but it seems to be aware of something happening in three-dimensional space. That's some level of consciousness to me.
It's at least, I would at least say there's the makings of consciousness. It seems like you throw enough of those kludges on top of each other and it starts looking like what a human can do. In some ways or another, the way like humans are, that we tend to react to stimuli sometimes at levels that we're not even totally aware of and come up with the justifications after the fact. Just to give a physics example, we can say that a rock has mass or an electron has mass, but physicists, wanted to know, well, why, and why that particular amount of mass or what have you, and come up with these big elaborate explanations that take decades to finally work out doing the experiments and figure out, oh, okay, so is this fundamental thing is made up of this even more fundamental thing. And we want to take something like consciousness, which seems so complex, and say it's just a fundamental thing and there's no other underlying explanation. It seems unsatisfying, to say the least.
Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, the guy used quantum entanglement to argue that consciousness exists beyond the physical realm, or better to say, the physical world is a result of consciousness rather than consciousness being a result of the physical world. And as soon as you go quantum with me, I just kind of back off because I'm like, I don't understand it. And you're a physics professor or a former physics professor. Is there anything about that is appealing to you where you could say there's some kind of quantum explanation for consciousness?
Well, I would first stop at the point of saying like somehow quantum mechanics indicates there's something supernatural, because quantum mechanics says this is how the natural world works. So if you're saying naturalism, this is how it works, therefore it's not natural, that's just incoherent in my mind. So first I'll say like that entire approach is just a no-go to me. Nonetheless, it seems like there are interesting ideas from other physicists like Roger Penrose trying to come up with ideas of like entanglement, disentanglement, or random events in the brain giving rise to consciousness. I have to admit I have not read his massive tome on the subject matter, but considering just like how big and hot the brain is, it's really hard for me to see how quantum things that really only, can act and last at extremely small scales. And if you want them to hold on for a long time, not just like an absolute snap of the fingers, you have to have temperatures close to absolute zero. And I could be cold-blooded sometimes, but I'm not that cold.
Yeah, that's weird. I didn't know that. So quantum states of matter don't exist very long then.
They don't. The term uses entangled, that basically two particles will kind of like share a special connection or bond with each other, but they basically only hold on to that until somebody else comes along and bumps into them. Best way to make sure nobody bumps into you is be extremely, extremely cold, so there's very little motion of the particles. So like the people that have been trying to develop quantum computers, to do that, they have to have their devices under temperatures very, very close to absolute zero, so almost nothing is jostling around.
Wow, that's crazy. What's your take on panpsychism, at least? Maybe idealism isn't necessarily appealing to you, but what about the idea that, consciousness is everywhere? It's in everything, no matter how big, no matter how small.
Yeah, I've tried following that debate. I've even had a little bit of back and forth with one of his proponents, Philip Goff, on Twitter, just to make sure I'm, not just staying in my own head thinking about how this works. It is interesting in how they want to approach it and say we're going to make sure everything we do and say is consistent with physics, and say that it's actually something undetectable by physics in general, like there's no experiment you can do and find it in the lab, that is just this property that doesn't actually change how particles act, which is interesting because they'll say that this is why the theory is so great, it's natural, it fits everything. I say it's completely forced onto the theory, because there's no reason a conscious thing has to follow the laws of physics. It's because, hey, we've discovered these things exist, and now unless you want your theory to be wrong, you better conform to what the physicists say, because
right.
we know what we're talking about. We've had 400 years of practice. The idea of everything being consciousness is in some ways the natural thing. I mean, heck, just go back to everyone's favorite book, the Bible, and flip it open right to Genesis, and how does God bring the world into existence? He tells it to. That requires nature at some level to have some sort of consciousness that basically agrees to follow the Almighty. And that's actually kind of the norm in so many of these ancient religions, like Babylonian myth of Marduk bringing things into existence or controlling things, is because things listen to Marduk. That only makes sense if like the elements are conscious. So in some sense, panpsychism, or at least something like it, has existed for humanity for a long time, and way before anyone thought there were laws of physics. Now we've learned a thing or two, and now saying, okay, now panpsychism says, okay, everything follows the laws of physics, everything's consistent with that. That's a forced on constraint, not a natural outcome of the theory. While under, like, say, a more functionalist approach, like Daniel Dennett just says, we're just going to start from the science, no, forcing onto the theory, and now try to explain consciousness, or even consciousness as some sort of illusion. Might be a hard sell, but at least it's not as gerrymandered, I would say. And the more fun thing is, even when they want to say they're consistent with all the physics, I'd argue they are fundamentally not. So just so the audience knows that usually the most prominent voices in panpsychism have been arguing that all the fundamental particles out there, electrons, quarks, things like that, have some kind of sort of consciousness. What that even is, frankly, I don't know, but I'll give it a pass. I'll be nice.
Right.
We're saying that somehow electrons have some sort of consciousness, and when you put a bunch of them together in just the right way, somehow they give rise to our total consciousness as humans. How that works, they admit they don't know. It's one of the big problems. Okay, we don't necessarily know how the brain gives us consciousness as well. Fine, we'll say we don't know. But if you're going to say everything fundamental is consciousness, well, I think there's a big exception, even if you say everything follows the laws of physics, because there's this thing in the universe that we care a lot about, and if you open your eyes, you'll see it. It's light. Light, or photons, are fundamental particles. And I claim there is no way they can have consciousness, because photons can't experience anything. They don't even experience the passage of time. Anything that travels at the speed of light, according to special relativity, does not experience time at all. Every particle of light is a timeless entity. It never experiences any ticks of a clock if it were wearing some sort of tiny little watch.
How is that possible?
How is that?
Like, how does it not like, you just blew my mind.
Hey, that's what Einstein was trying to do. Basically, in 1905, he comes out with like these 5 papers, and I'm just like, all right, I'm messing with all of you now. Watch out.
A photon doesn't function in time the same way that we do, since it's going the speed of light?
Right. Basically, you've probably heard the idea of time dilation. The faster you go, the slower time will appear to go. So basically, if I sent my brother on a spaceship at 99% the speed of light, and I could get a good telescope and look at his watch would appear to be ticking very, very, very slowly compared to mine. And the faster he would go, the slower and slower that clock would appear to be going. And if he reached the speed of light, his clock, from my point of view, would actually have stopped. And my brother would exist in this timeless trip until his ship crashed into something. And that's basically what light does. It zips at a speed so that it never experiences time, and then hits something and then stops existing. So
for him, it would just be like he would experience things right up until he went the speed of light, and then he would just, the only experience he would have would be crashing. It would be like instantaneous.
He wouldn't even have that because, for example, light coming from the sun to the earth, from our point of view, it takes 8.5 minutes and it has to travel, tens of millions of kilometers. Light, on the other hand, it's doubly weird. Not only does it not experience time, but also there's the fact of length contraction. So light literally sees no distance between its starting point and its ending point.
So, so if I got really, really small, what was that movie where the guy got really small and went in the human body? It's like an 80s movie or something.
Oh, if you're talking about, is that Inner Space?
Inner Space, yeah. That was so cheesy.
Yep.
Okay.
I've only seen bits and pieces of that one.
Well, you're not missing much. But if I get in, the inner space spaceship and I ride a photon particle, right? Or is it a wave? It's a particle,
yes.
Right? Or is it both? I don't know. So okay, but I'm on a photon and I'm leaving the sun and going to Earth. It would just be instantaneous, is what you're saying. My experience.
You wouldn't even have the experience of travel. You would just be there. You would literally see no distance between objects because in the same way you have time dilation, you have length contraction. So again, if I imagine my brother in a spaceship zipping by at 99% the speed of light, his ship would look squished from my point of view. It would look shorter.
Weird.
Oh yeah, if the stuff was easy and if it made sense, we wouldn't have had to wait until 1905 to start publishing it and thinking, okay, maybe there's something here.
We had one show on panpsychism. It was Emerson Green and Aaron Rabinowitz, and that's from Walden Pod and Philosophers in Space. At one point in the conversation, someone said, I can't remember who was it, but someone says, obviously it's not like something, I think it was me, obviously it's not like something to be a chair. And I remember the argument comes back, well, maybe it is. And I thought, at this point, this conversation, it's just like, if you're willing to even say that it's like something to be a chair in the same way that we would say it's like something to be a bat, or even to put it in the same context, it's just, I feel like the panpsychist view, like it's getting a little just too crazy. Is that a good way to say it?
I also see in some ways a little bit of a, at least it strikes me as inconsistent because it seems like the panpsychist will say fundamental particles, consciousness, rocks and chairs, not, but then humans, yes, again. And how that is allowed is not clear to me because I made up the same stuff as the chair is, just a different arrangement. And if you're saying the arrangement matters, then why does the underlying stuff need to be consciousness? Well, that matters is the arrangement of the stuff, in which case, all right, you're a consciousness functionalist. You're like Dan Dennett. Why are you being a panpsychist now?
That's interesting. Yeah. So I've noticed one of their complaints is, why do you think that you're just having consciousness like just emerge out of your brain? That seems like a silly idea when consciousness is the only thing that you're really aware of. So why do you think that it's a result of something else when you can't prove anything other than I think, therefore I am? And it's kind of funny what you said. It's like turning it back on him and saying, well, if you think it's in everything, why do you think it like comes and goes and it just comes back? Like now that I have a brain, I'm conscious again.
Heck, I even try to think about, the younger version of me and think like, well, when did I become conscious? Because, I might have earliest memories, but when was I a conscious entity? And again, if you say there's this dividing line, this obvious point, like, okay, a 6-week-old, not consciousness, but 6.5 weeks. Oh, now he's a thinker.
Yeah, the light switches on for some reason. That's funny. Well, what about reality itself not being real? Like, I feel kind of comfortable dipping my toe into that one. You know, like I feel like that makes a little more sense to me than just saying like everything's conscious. That seems a little wacky. But the idea that whenever I look out, I'm not necessarily seeing reality as much as my brain is interpreting what my eyes are doing. You know what I mean? But it's obviously a train's coming at me. If I stand on the track, it'll hit me, you know, but
yeah.
I'm not seeing the real, right?
Oh yeah. That's unfortunately something I also have to contend with because, a thought that I had somewhat recently with a little bit of digging, just to do something else that kind of blows the mind. But once you think about it, you realize it has to be true. Do you have some coffee with you right now?
Yeah. Having a cup of coffee right now.
All right. Take a look at the coffee. What color would you say it is?
Black, like I like my ladies.
All right, so no cream or anything like that in there. Mm-mm. Very good. Okay. We have similar tasting coffee then. The coffee beans themselves, what color would you say they are?
Brown, I guess.
That's what I would say too. What if I told you brown doesn't exist?
Well, we both are aware of something. Your brown might be different from my brown, but that, you know.
Oh, I'm being even more fundamental than that. There is no such thing as a kind of light called brown. There is no point on the light spectrum that says this is where the brown is. There's no frequency of light that corresponds to brown.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I guess that could be true.
And yet we see brown things all the time. Go into a forest, there's all these brown stick things coming out of the ground. I like eating this brown stuff called chocolate.
Yeah. And
yet the brown that I see there isn't actually brown light. There is no like LED light that you could build at a manufacturer that would give off brown light because there is no actual frequency that corresponds to brown.
Well, it's just the bean absorbing everything except brown, right? All the colors.
Oh, not even that would work because that would still say that there is a brown frequency that's either absorbed or emitted or what have you. There is no actual brown frequency. The best thing you can do is take a look at a rainbow and you see the entire range of the colors. And you'll look in there and you say, hey, no brown.
Huh.
So ultimately, brown is actually orange. It's just context dependent.
Oh, that's funny.
But hey, we all have this experience of brown. We don't even question it. We've grown up with brown things all the time. But also, it's a cultural construct in some ways. Like the word brown is in some ways relatively new or was pointed out to me when it comes to Chinese. I've been slowly trying to learn this language, but long ways to go there. Ooh, that's a hard one. But the word for colors, you have like red, 红色, yellow, 黄色. For brown, it's literally 咖啡色. And that's not because coffee's been around in China for a long time. It's a new loan word.
So there's no brown. It's orange.
Yeah.
Brown is orange.
Yeah. Orange with like certain saturation conditions. The details I'd have to re-examine to say well. But nonetheless, there is no actual brown color. We've accepted the existence of brown just because it's now become culturally useful. And some ways, it makes me want to stand back and say, okay, to what degree does this explain consciousness? And just the vocabulary and the categories we create for it is just weird modern construct. And if we went back 1,000 years, we wouldn't even think about talking this way.
Yeah. What if it's just a flaw of our language that we're not able to fully understand consciousness?
I think that could be a part of it, that we just have not done a very good job of getting the right verbiage for it. And ultimately, maybe even it's, conscious isn't a thing. Maybe it's a process, just a really complicated one. And with my own area of work in specifically engineering artificial intelligence, as that's my day job, like training neural nets to do various business tasks, I look at what those things do, and I wouldn't call them consciousness, but the way a neural net's supposed to work, it's fundamentally related to what goes on in our brain. The entire idea of these neural networks that's part of the AI revolution going on has been basically say, okay, that's kind of sort of how the brain works. Let's copy it, turn it into a digital form and see what it does. And, it's had some success. Shout at Alexa to tell you the weather and it usually knows what you're doing. But it's because somebody built an artificial intelligence to do that. So the question is, do you just make it big enough and complicated enough? And then all of a sudden it's a Cylon.
Yeah. I mean, cars are parking themselves now. It's so crazy. Do you share in the whole Elon Musk, Sam Harris fear that once we finally make AI, it's going to be a threat to us?
The idea that, the general AI coming and trying to, one way or another destroy us, take over the world, turn everything into paper clips, whichever, apocalyptic scenario there is, I think before then we're going to have the problems that we currently have. people using these AIs to nasty ends, whether it's people gathering up huge amounts of data on Facebook so they can service ads to eat more bacon, or convinces our democracy doesn't ultimately work. That's, I think, much more direct and terrible than what a possible general intelligence might do in the future. And can we even get there is an open question. I don't feel that fear right now because it's too distant and we're too good at, ruining things already with our own natural intelligences.
I always wonder, though, if the reason we don't see aliens, the whole Fermi paradox, is just because the probability of existing long enough for a society to evolve that far, and then, say, create artificial intelligence that can then fly across the universe, the probability that a planet can sustain life for that long is so low because something happens. Either we blow ourselves up a nuclear war and, you get a reset, or an asteroid's going to hit it, whatever. It's just that planets just don't stay in the same state of nature long enough for that to happen. And that's kind of a scary thought, because that would make the whole universe kind of just so short term with life. Like, life just doesn't exist that long, and it has to reset. And it's sad. It's a sad thought.
The idea of the great filter that's called, I don't have a good sense of how much we should fear that, but considering we've already had a few close scares in just the last 100 years of nearly wiping out all life on Earth, Cuban Missile Crisis, or somebody detecting a satellite launch and thinking it's a nuclear launch. So many times we could have just accidentally offed ourselves, and we still have that risk because, hey, the US, Russia, there's a lot of nuclear weapons just sitting around just waiting to blow up a city. That does, give me some fear. Does it explain why the night is so dark when it comes to alien signals? It's a hard one. As for someone who's actually looked for the aliens, literally I was a summer intern at the SETI Institute long ago and was playing with their radio telescopes and tried to see if I could find anybody. Unfortunately, nobody phoned home that night. But for maybe the biggest reason why that we're not going to see anybody, especially at our doorsteps, is I don't know if anyone has made the argument, but just the straight up economic one. Imagine humanity with 1,000 years better tech, and we realize, okay, is it actually worth spending the money to send a rocket ship and send humans to colonize another place in another part of the galaxy? Is it even worthwhile? Because you basically have to have humans sitting in capsules for decades, maybe even centuries, and they'll never be able to see their friends or family. Even communication takes years. Is it even worthwhile? And I wonder if people will just do the economic math and say, hey, we're good here. And if maybe that just explains why it's just too hard to get around, that it's just not economically worthwhile.
Well, wouldn't we just kind of fabricate value at that point? I would think. I mean,
it's really hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So I definitely want to.
The Star Trek concept of there's no money in the future. That one, to me, it's almost like we all know if we make it, if we get that far, we know we're not going to have money. It's a silly idea. It works. We need it for right now. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But obviously we're not going to try to live our lives attempting to accumulate more and more currency. It's something silly. They're going to look back at us during this time and just think, ugh, wow, they were so greedy and their lives were so meaningless. That one, eating animals, I don't see that lasting very long. It's just, I don't think so.
I definitely like that. But even Star Trek has been hard pressed to keep to that. If you've been watching the newest Star Trek series, Picard, there's money in that universe again.
Oh, is it really? I haven't seen the new one. I don't like the idea of saying I have to pay a monthly fee to watch one show. So I've just been I'll just wait till.
Yeah, I'm not going to plug CBS All Access, but there's other shows on there too, including another Star Trek.
Oh, really? Is it pretty cool?
Well, some people have said bad things about Star Trek Discovery, but I've enjoyed it. And in fact, the last season was actually about killer AI that gets out of control, trying to take over the galaxy because it gathers enough data.
Star Trek fans are so different from Star Wars fans. It's we're just not as bitter. Star Wars fans are always complaining about every single change. And you just told me, I don't know, Star Trek just changed the universe in the future. They got money back. And I don't care. I'm just oh, that's fine. Whatever. That's one version of the story. They keep killing Spock and bringing him back and forth. In every single movie, somehow Spock's back. I don't care. But with Star Wars, I don't know. It's almost like it's a sacrilege whenever Luke can just make himself reappear on some other planet, or Leia's floating through space and not dying. It pissed everybody off.
And especially someone who thought of the most recent trilogy that actually episode 8 was the best of the 3, at least in my obviously correct opinion. I definitely don't feel the same bitterness there. The most recent one, though, I'll say was story-wise a mess. And if you've also been seeing how angry everyone is about now the novelization, which isn't even officially out yet.
Why are Star Wars fans more pissy, though, than Star Trek fans?
Well, for one thing, I will say there are plenty of Star Trek fans who I think are quite pissy. A lot of people were angry about the way Star Trek Discovery was, how they changed the Klingons, or I should say changed the Klingons again, because they've now had like 4 different transformations if you've been watching since 1966.
They used to just be dudes with beards. There wasn't anything weird about them at all.
I mean, heck, the weird thing is that actually Star Trek Enterprise, they actually made like this 5-part mini episode series to explain why the Klingons didn't have brow ridges.
That's nuts. So they took the forehead away?
Yeah, they tried to explain, it was a genetic engineering project the humans had that got in control of the Klingons, that became this like flu that was infecting everyone, and the cure required them to lose their forehead ridges, which explains why in the original series they had smooth heads, and later on you have Worf with his much more prominent skull shape.
And those Klingons, they had a rough run. Like everything bad happened to them.
I mean, heck, they were supposed to be the stand-in for the Soviet Union, so yeah, they had to have all the bad stuff, including their own Chernobyl.
The Praxis, right?
Yeah.
That's funny, their own Chernobyl. I never even made that correlation. That's great. What's your take on this whole fear about Bernie with socialism and he's going to lead us to communism? Everybody's freaking out. That's definitely, saying democratic socialists definitely leaves them open to that attack. I didn't think that was good marketing on his part.
Marketing-wise, it's probably a good point that it's tough. In some ways, he is being a bit smarter, though, when it comes to like his healthcare stuff, saying it's Medicare for all rather than socialized medicine. That's, I think, good marketing on that point. But, I mean, he's definitely not a communist in the sense of public control of the means of production.
Yeah.
And, of course, I don't have the same fears considering, like, I was in Massachusetts. In the primaries, I voted for Warren because I basically see Warren and Bernie on the same economic level. But unfortunately, Warren decided that she can't stick around anymore. This brings tears to my eyes. But
did you vote for her just because she was a woman?
I voted for her because she's just so fucking confident. Or she just knows what she's talking about. She had a plan for everything.
What about the taking money from large donors? That was one thing that I saw. She and Sanders had some similarities on, but then she said she intends to do it later, I think. Was that how you remembered that?
I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details there. Yeah. I definitely remember it being a big deal when Buttigieg was getting billionaire donations.
Oh, for sure, and wine caves and all that. And I don't think it's your fault for being fuzzy on that, because she kind of flip-flopped back and forth with the money thing. And I do too, to be honest. I really like the idea of what Bernie's trying to do and saying, my average donation's $18. That's cool. Like, let's get money out of politics. That's a very effective way to do it. But is it going to be successful? Well, while everybody else is getting just all this campaign money, let's not pretend that the American people don't get fooled with the propaganda and the advertisements. I mean, I heard somebody say something positive about Bloomberg the other day, and I thought, what? It's just because you saw his ad at the Super Bowl. Like, this is so stupid. Why are you even considering supporting Bloomberg? But it's just, people fall for that crap. It's effective. And if we're not going to play by the same rules, I feel like it's a good plan. I just fear that it's a little too pure. We can't get that pure with politics. So politics has got to be kind of dirty, right?
Well, frankly, of course, the first person who says, hey, I'm going to fight with my arm behind my back, will you do the same? That person will say no and then pummels you with 2 fists. Mm-hmm. The person who doesn't, get well financed is basically asking to, have their jaw removed from their head. It's just not politically, strategically smart in any way. And money can do some things. I mean, yeah, you mentioned Bloomberg. I personally want to fly now to American Samoa to just ask people why they actually, voted for him, because he apparently won in American Samoa. And I don't know what ad campaign he was running down there. Did he just completely fill their Facebook feeds? I don't know. Yeah,
I was thinking the same thing. Like, if that's real, and I know saying, no, he didn't really win there. Well, okay, now you're cracking open a whole conspiracy theory, but it's not that crazy. We've seen how they just blatantly lie to us about different forms of what was the in Ohio, like all of a sudden we're using some app and the app is actually owned by like the wife of Buttigieg's campaign manager. You know, like it got crazy real fast, and it just looked shady.
Oh, you mean like what was going on in Iowa, right?
Iowa, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say didn't remember that happening in Ohio, but yeah. Let's just say it's one of those great arguments for why we need to keep having paper ballots. No one can hack paper.
Right. Well, you can just out and out lie. Just say you counted it and you counted it one way and not the other. But there's always that evidence.
Best thing you could do is have 10 people around the ballot box, so everyone's staring down each other. It's pretty hard to, do the switcheroo then.
Yeah. Whenever I did voting here in Texas, it was on the computer, but the computer then printed it onto a ballot. So I thought, okay, yeah, that's fair. But while I was voting, I noticed that the computer program, like the format itself, the software, these old folks are not going to be able to handle that. It was a little bit confusing just because you had to like scroll to the bottom of a page. But I'm like, why am I having to scroll on a touch screen anyway? Why doesn't it work like my iPhone? Like we have certain expectations, but I just thought like old people are going to get confused. There's just no way. Like people, I don't think we really understand just how horrible a lot of their brains are and deteriorated that they could only just do really simple things, and if you give them a pen and a piece of paper and put a bubble next to someone's name, they can handle that. But there's a very large amount of our democracy that just cannot handle electronics still.
That will be true to some extent, but I'll say that I would say a bigger part is the fact there are incentives to make the interface as convoluted or as unintuitive as possible, so that way it advantages certain parties over others.
Yeah.
I mean, if you make it so like, yeah, it's hard to debug why every time I try voting for the Democrat, it keeps somehow giving the vote to Trump. In fact, it's like, oh, every time I, tried voting for Obama, Mitt Romney got 3 votes. How'd that happen? I'm not sure. And it's not like anyone's going to share the source code so we can figure out where the bug is. It's going to be opaque on purpose because of the interests involved. And heck, it's probably even hard to actually get good programmers to work there because Google and Facebook are buying up all the really good programmers and leaving those who probably are getting paid half this amount and don't have the enthusiasm. And it's like, okay, hopefully this will work on Tuesday.
Yeah, no kidding. But do you see any advantage to Biden going up against Trump? Like, is there any opportunity where Trump doesn't win if that's the case?
To me, how the election will go is probably going to be who can do the best at actually turning out the vote. Who's actually, going to get the enthusiasm going, because that's really what's going to determine this election. And especially considering the way the electoral college system works, where literally you can get a plurality of the vote and still lose. It's going to be, here's what's, theoretically possible. If there was a big enough get out the vote campaign in Texas and it flipped it blue, game over.
Yeah. Well, after this whole election, I say we get back together and I ask you some more questions about consciousness. Are you down?
I'm down.
Everybody check out, can they get The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptic's View on Amazon?
Yep, Amazon is the best place to get it. I think it's also at Barnes & Noble, but everyone's going to Amazon, let's be frank.
Yeah, right. All right.
Bezos owns everything.
Dr. Aaron Adair, The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View. Thank you so much for coming on and just blowing my mind today. I did not know Brown didn't exist. Thank you to Aaron. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to our patrons. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I'm speaking to a black Trump supporter. That's sure to be interesting. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.